are carried out, and he may have been a part of that. It may simply be that he's an older man now. We don't have a clue as to his exact age, but we do know as we read through Scripture that it was often the practice of old men to sit at the entrance to the city, the gates, and they could be witnesses as legal transactions were taking place, or they could offer counsel and advice to those who came to seek it. You see, throughout all of biblical history, with rare exception, there are exceptions, the elderly were respected because age implied wisdom, and they were sought out, not excluded. Our culture is, so youth-oriented that we've lost sight of the fact that the elderly have a whole lot more to contribute than they're given credit for. In my judgment, in many cases, when someone is about to reach their peak, they're put out to pasture out here in the world. And companies want new blood, which almost always means young blood, which sometimes means disaster. Well, that's not what you find in the Bible with rare occasion. And I say rare occasion because I can think of at least one example where the king sought advice from older, wiser advisors, and then from his friends of his own age, and the advice was opposite, and he sided with his young friends. It cost him most of his kingdom as a result. Of course, we're talking about Rehoboam. If he had just listened to the counsel of his father's aged advisors, it would have been a different story for the nation of Judah. But he didn't. And it cost him dearly. It may be that Mordecai is just out there. He's reached that stage in life where he can't do a lot of other things, but he can still offer sage advice. And honestly, don't we all eventually, if we live long enough, get there? I can tell you with absolute certainty, from a physical perspective, I can't do what I could do just 5 or 10 years ago. I just don't have it in me anymore. I can work 4 hours outdoors, and then I need 24 hours to recover, at least. It's just, as you get older, that's the way it works. I think my mind still works a little bit better than my body, but you're the judge of that, and you may doubt that too. I don't know, but I digress again. Mordecai is out here back at the gate doing what he typically does. This didn't go to his head. He's been honored. He saved the king's life. Well, okay, now back to what life is all about for me. Back to the gate I go. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried to bring Haman to the feast that Esther had prepared. So all of this is playing out over a course of about 48 hours. And it's not going in any way like Haman thought it was going to go. He has gone back home, and you can just imagine the conversation that he's having with Zeresh, his wife. You just don't believe this. You just can't believe what happened to me this morning. You know what we talked about last night, what we thought and our friends all thought was the appropriate thing to do? You know those gallows that I had built where Mordecai was going to be impaled? Oh, that's off. It's not going to happen. Guess what I had to do? I got to work this morning, and of all things, the king honored Mordecai. And you can hear him telling how humiliated he was when he dressed his archenemy and put him on the king's horse and led him around the square, proclaiming as he did, this is what the king does to those he seeks to honor. What do you suppose Zeresh is saying to him? I don't have a clue. I don't know if she's more like Job's wife or she's more supportive. You know, when Job's life fell apart, her response was, curse God and die. And it may be that she had a similar thought, because as we learn as chapter 7 unfolds, they are certain that if Mordecai has been honored, the Jew, that the Jews now have the favor of the king, and things don't look good for Mordecai. We'll learn that in chapter 7 as it plays out. But here we are, he's home, and he's telling his sob story to his wife. And I imagine that she's saying, you know, this is not right. You're the one man that should be honored. Why the king honored Mordecai makes no sense. You know, just deal with it. We'll come through this all right, and we'll have other opportunities. I think that's what most wives would say. I think Job's wife is probably the exception. I have to have personally a much higher opinion of women than one would get by just looking at the story of Job. I'm no more impressed with her than I am with Lot's wife or with Rachel. But I'm getting far afield here. My ladies' class knows that I don't really care for Rachel. Jacob's wife, she said to her husband, give me children or I die. And it wasn't his fault. She was the problem. And I just don't have a lot of sympathy for those kinds of demands, so to speak. But by and large, women are presented in Scripture as being stellar of character and spirituality. We'll talk a little bit about that actually next Sunday morning when we deal with Proverbs 31. But there are exceptions, and I think Rachel's one, Job's wife's another, and it may be that Zeresh was not much better. But what I do know is that he's home now and things do not look good when the eunuchs arrive and say, it's time to go to the banquet. And the eunuchs arrive because they are no doubt sent from Esther herself, because she's the one hosting the banquet. They would be the king's eunuchs because everyone in the kingdom belongs to the king. They're all his subjects. And only eunuchs served in the harem. And even in public, anyone who got, according to historians, closer than 7 feet to anyone in the harem or to the queen herself was subject to death. That was the Persian standard, so the historians say. Closer than 7 feet, and you're risking your own life. So the eunuchs, they don't pose a threat to the queen or the harem, so they pretty well have free reign. They've been discharged, I believe, by Esther to fetch Mordecai, or fetch Haman for the second banquet. And again, I told you last week, it just all plays out in ways that I would never anticipate, but that just shows you my lack of imagination and my inability to know ahead of time how things work out. Because I would have expected Esther just to plead her case, the king to agree, and the Jews to be spared in some way. But it's not what happened, as you well know, and it took 48 hours, approximately 2 days, to get to the right point. Yes, Kurt?
I was just going to mention, if we back up to verse 13 a little bit, she's not totally supportive of him, but I think she's on him. She tells us that Mordecai's news is not going to prevail.
Yep. Yep. And she was right. And sometimes you need that kind of plain talk. And sometimes you just need to be encouraged. This was time for plain talk. I did hear the bell. I like to visit. I don't want to start chapter 7 because we've just got 4 more Sundays and 4 more chapters, and we're trying to do a chapter each Lord's Day. I don't know what's going to happen. When we get to chapter 10, I think we're going to have a test because it's really short. And we'll just find, don't panic, by the way. It's not a written test. I'm not going to grade it. We're just going to have a basic review. And you can test your memory and how well you know the story. So that's coming up the 29th of May, God willing. Enjoy the next 15 minutes or so as you visit among yourselves, and we'll get ready for worship at 10.